I got to do that. Oh, I'm recording. I'm sitting here going, am I recording? Oh my goodness. Well, it wouldn't be, hey y'all, if Nana wasn't a little bit off, right? So, although I'm obsessed with Karen Reed, I had to take a slight little break. Um, Friday and Saturday, it was grandbaby time. Now, Friday night and Saturday night, of course, Friday night I tried to watch 2020. Sorry, I didn't even have time to hit the mute button. Um, but unfortunately, I don't have, well, not unfortunately, we don't have cable, and I'm glad we don't. Hardly ever, I never watch it. But I did want to see the 2020 because I wanted to know if they were going to do the right thing. No, they didn't. They did kind of like when uh, Johnny Depp was in trial. What can I say? So, with that said, for those of you that were, I mean, I'm not just like a Karen Reid supporter and came here to do this. I'm a, I love true crime. I love true crime. So, that's pretty much the gist of how I got here. Was I love true crime, and that case interests me. Well, it was at the beginning of the year this year when a judge in Nevada was assaulted on the bench, literally in front of everybody, in front of the world to see. Do y'all remember that? So before we even start, I'm going to watch the trial because I'm real curious. I'm very curious as to why this person didn't just plead guilty because we all watched him snap. We all watched him go from one thing to another. And I did listen to a little bit. I haven't heard a lot. I did listen to the judge that was assaulted. I listened to her testimony, which I've already recorded that portion, but I'm going to fit it in the right day or time. So it's not time yet because this is just starting. And I did hear just a little bit of what the defense is going to try to put in people's minds. So it looks like I didn't cut that, but I did. No, they're fine. Sorry, I did my bangs again today. So I'm not going to give any of it away. um, I will say that I was glued that evening. Um, and I went online looking just anything to tell me, was the judge okay? What was her condition? It was very, very concerning for anyone to get attacked. It's a nightmare. It's horrible. But when you're a judge, you know things can happen because there's some really bad people. There's some really sick people. So we know that can happen, but it doesn't. It just doesn't happen. And the sheer terror, I heard her. And she's going to carry that for the rest of her life. I didn't realize she was in her 60s, nor did I realize or know she had 3 children. I mean, I assumed she had a family, and I was like, oh my gosh, because you can only imagine how they would feel watching this unfold. But thank heavens he didn't hurt her anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start it. I'm going to try my very best to skip areas where nothing's happening or nothing of importance, but I'm not going to fly through it so fast that I miss facial expressions, because sometimes the facial expressions say a lot. And I caught that during the, I mean, I've always known that, but during the judge's testimony, watching the defendant, there was a few times that, don't tell me, don't even tell me that he didn't want to kill her. That's just my opinion. So let's get started. I'm going to see if I can do this in a timely manner and see if we just share along. I will stop it every now and again. And the other thing is, I've had people ask me to not talk while the video is playing. And I'll try really hard not to. Sometimes I just, I hit that unmute button and forget the other one. I'll also say that I'll try to remember to keep myself on mute, although it is very late and all of my grands are tucked in for the night, so you wouldn't hear the yelling, screaming, doors shutting in and out and all that anyway. But you'll still see me, you may see me like have a fit, but it's not really a fit, and it's sort of kind of just what's the word? It's not a fit. You're going to see me reacting. You may think that I'm talking and you can't hear me, but if it's still playing along, it's just me being me, like how I usually watch this stuff. So yeah, I may look like I'm talking and you can't hear me, and if that happens, it's because I do know that mute works, right? So let's see. I hope that this really came to trial really fast. I can say that. We're going to do this and share screen. Oh, I need to make that bigger. Hold up. How's that? Oh, better. Okay. All right, guys. I'm starting at the seal, great state of Nevada.
He said probably off of the first witness, and so we don't want to take the time then to go ahead.
Okay, are we ready to proceed? And you want to need to read this instruction before you gave your opening.
It needs to be read before we introduce the evidence. I don't know what Mr. Arnold's preference is as to whether it's read before opening.
It can be done with your introductory remarks, Your Honor. If you're reading instructions, because it is going to be introduced, like we said, probably off of the first witness, and so we don't want to take the time then to go ahead and do the Travis instruction.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and bring the jury in, and I will read it right after I finish my instructions before they get up to do their opening. Okay?
Thank you, Your Honor.
I think we're going to skip the instructions.
of an introduction to the evidence which the state or defendant. Both sides are members of your family and
Sorry about that, guys. All right.
Do you have the microphone on? I'm about to turn it on right now.
Okay, thank you.
I tried to kill a judge today. Those were the defendant's words mere hours after he violently attacked Judge Mary Kay Holthus in this courthouse on January 3rd of 2024 in courtroom 3F.
She sounds real upset.
According to the laws of the state of Is she okay? Hey, radio somebody? Fucking radio somebody!
We're all here today because of that
I'm so sorry, everybody. I had to step away for a minute. So let me get back to it.
bravery and intervention of 6 men. Her law clerk, Michael Lasso, Correctional Officer Joseph Cabralda, Chief Deputy District Attorney Jory Scarborough, Chief Deputy District Attorney Richard Scow, Marshal Shane Brandon, the court marshal in Department 18, where this event occurred, and Marshal Ben Bachhuber, who is the court marshal in the courtroom next door. On the date of this incident, Judge Mary Kay Holthus was 62 years of age. She had been a judge since 2019. She had a mixed caseload, which meant she heard both civil matters and criminal matters. January 3rd of 2024 was a Wednesday, which meant it was a criminal calendar day. In anticipation of her calendar, she went through her calendar before the calendar actually occurred. Mr. Redden's case was obviously on calendar that day. She reviewed the relevant information pertinent to Mr. Redden's matter, which was on calendar for a motion to quash bench warrant and rendition of sentence, meaning he was supposed to be sentenced in front of her. The information she reviewed consisted of his pre-sentence investigation report. That report provides her important background information about Mr. Redden, but also the facts of the underlying offense. She made some preliminary notes. There was nothing particularly unique about Mr. Redden's case. Then her criminal calendar occurs. When Mr. Redden's case gets called, it's approximately 11:10 in the morning. A little more than halfway through her calendar, which began at 9:30 a.m. When the case gets called, initially, everything is going normal. You'll hear that typically with criminal sentencing, the state gets to argue first. Then a defendant is free to make a statement if he wishes to. In this case, Mr. Redden did. He argued for probation. He presented the court with information that he believed mitigated against a term of incarceration. After Mr. Redden was done, his defense attorney, Cesar Almasi, also made an argument to the court, seeking probation on his behalf. After Mr. Almasi was done, but prior to Judge Mary Kay Holthus having the opportunity to impose the sentence that she believed was appropriate, she made a comment, and that comment was interpreted by many people in the courtroom, including Mr. Redden, as indicating that he was not going to receive probation. After that comment was made, and before she imposed the sentence, Mr. Redden jumped over defense counsel's table, which was approximately 2.5 feet tall and 3 feet deep. He then bolted towards Judge Mary Kay Holthus' judicial bench. As you can see from this picture, the courtroom is set up differently from how this courtroom is set up. There's only one entrance and exit to the judicial bench in that courtroom. He then launched himself 4 feet, more than 4 feet, in the air and tackled Judge Mary Kay Holvis like she was a football player. He then once was over the bench and made contact with her, pulled her by the hair as hard as he could, and yanked her to the ground like she was a rag doll. When she testifies, you'll hear that she remembers being struck in the head, but she doesn't remember how it happened. She doesn't remember if it was an intentional act by the defendant, whether her head hit something, an object nearby during this altercation. But she remembers being jolted and frightened. She was trapped.
She was hit in the head because the defendant, when he knocked her out of her chair, you saw her head. I can't remember, I have to look again, but you saw her head either hit the table first, but I don't think so. I think it hit the wall, bounced off the wall, hit the desk. That's how she hurt herself. But, you know, she doesn't remember. But that's, I mean, he did that. Nobody else did that. He did that.
This is the judicial bench in that courtroom. That entrance is the only entrance to or from where she sits when she presides over her counter. And the altercation that you saw in the first clip happened right there. She had nowhere to go. She was terrified. She knew that she was no match for his physical strength. So she hid. She hid as far away from Mr. Redden as she possibly could. She crawled into the corner of that bench and waited there until the entire thing was over. When you watch the full video, you'll see that it took approximately 3 to 4 minutes before Mr. Redden was moved from that location. She was so shaken up, you'll hear, that initially she tried to climb that wall that you see in the picture and exit her courtroom where her court clerk sits. That's not an exit. But she did not want to be near Mr. Redden, and Mr. Redden was still in the entrance when he was eventually apprehended. Michael Lasso was the first person to intervene on her behalf because he was situated closest. Michael Lasso is her law clerk. He's been her law clerk for several months now. I'll tell you about what his job duties are as a law clerk. But more than a law clerk, he is also a close family friend of the Holvises. He has known Judge Mary Kay Holvis his entire life. He was not supposed to be at work that day. Fortunately, he changed his mind and decided to go in. He will tell you that among his many job duties as his law clerk, or as her law clerk, is he sits next to her during the counters in case something comes up that she needs help with. Thankfully, on this day, he was situated exactly where he needed to be, to her left in that courtroom, as she presided over criminal matters. He was answering emails, performing work, and also paying attention to what was occurring on the calendar. He first realized that something was amiss when Judge Holvis made a comment and her marshal moved closer to Mr. Redden. You will hear that when her court marshal moves closer to a defendant who appears out of custody for sentencing, that generally means that defendant is about to be remanded into custody. When the marshal moved closer to Mr. Redden and started to unclasp his handcuffs, they jingled. And then he remembers seeing Mr. Redden bolt over defense counsel's table and across the courtroom. Initially, he believed that perhaps Mr. Redden was trying to exit out of one of these rear exits in the courtroom that staff use. But it became apparent to him pretty quickly that his intended target was Judge Mary Kay Holvis. And when you watch the video, you'll see the surprise, the shock in his eyes as he's watching this occur. He remembers Mr. Redden launching himself directly at Judge Holvis and knocking her out of her chair with such force that her head hit the tile wall behind the bench. He immediately knew that he needed to take action because he was frightened for her life and he was frightened for his own life. So he lifts.
All right, excuse me for just a minute. So the thing is, as he sits there shaking his head, is he planning to what? Pretend he didn't know what he was doing? I mean, they're going to show the clip of him talking to her prior to. So,
Mr. Redden off of Mary Kay Holtz because he's the closest person to her. He got some assistance along the way. And the first person to come to his aid, and Judge Holtz's aid, was Correctional Officer Joseph Geraldo. You will hear that on this date, he was assigned to the Field Services Unit at the Clark County Detention Center. That means that he's one of the correctional officers that's responsible for transporting inmates to and from the court hearings. He's also responsible for documenting the outcome of those hearings. So he was seated in the witness stand in that courtroom, which is directly next to the judge, but there's no doorway between the witness stand and the judge's bench. So when he saw the defendant go for Judge Mary Kay Holtz and tackle her, he had to climb over that wall to get to the point where he could assist. When you watch the video where the yellow circle is, that's Officer Cabralda climbing over the wall. At this time, Officer Cabralda was the only correctional officer remaining in the courtroom because other correctional officers had just done what they call a download, which means moving defendants who are already done with their cases back to the detention center. You will hear that he struggled mightily trying to get control over Mr. Redden. That Mr. Redden resisted both he and Mr. Lasso and everyone else that came to their aid very hard. At some point, Mr. Redden was able to knock him to the ground, at which point Mr. Lasso and Mr. Scarborough began to work even harder to get him off of Officer Cabralda, because Officer Cabralda was armed that, which could have presented a whole new set of problems.
Three people. 3 or 4.
Mr. Redden continued to resist, which is why you see Officer Cabralda and Officer Lasso striking him over and over again, because they needed to get him to comply, and he was not getting it. He was still struggling to get away from them, struggling to get back to Judge Holtz. Eventually, they do get him under control, and Officer Cabralda actually uses one of Marshal Shane Brandon's, his actual set of handcuffs. He gets one cuff on Mr. Redden, but Mr. Redden is still resisting, so it takes an additional marshal before they can actually get him into both arms into the cuffs. Chief Deputy District Attorney Jory Scarborough was in the courtroom that day because he had another matter that was on calendar, not Mr. Redden's case. He's assigned to a specialty unit at the Clark County DA's office, the gun crimes unit, and you'll hear that as a specialty team deputy, he makes multiple court appearances in a day, oftentimes. So he arrived at Judge Holtz's department at around 10 a.m., and he was still present, waiting for his case to be called when this broke out. Again, he was partially paying attention, partially not, but he got the gist that Mr. Redden's case was on for sentencing. The state wanted prison time. Mr. Redden wanted probation. And then he figured out that Judge Holtz was not going to give him probation. He remembers, like Mr. Lasso, watching Marshal Shane Brandon move closer to the defendant. He looks down to do something else. And when he looks up, he sees that the defendant has already cleared defense counsel's table and is running full speed and hurling himself at Judge Mary Kay Holtz. Like Mr. Lasso and Officer Cabralda, he immediately knew that he needed to assist. So he went around the witness stand, climbed over the same wall that Officer Cabralda climbed over, and tried to wrap his elbow around Mr. Redden's neck to gain compliance. It obviously didn't work initially. He'll tell you that Mr. Redden was elbowing him repeatedly and trying to buck him off so that he could get back to Judge Holtz. But with the assistance of Chief Deputy Richard Scow and the other people who I've already mentioned, they were ultimately able to get him to comply. You will hear from both Michael Lasso and Jory Scarborough that once Mr. Redden was under control, their first thought was to check on Judge Holtz.
Who knows what he did?
When they checked on her, they saw her still curled up in the fetal position underneath her bench. And she looked terrified. She was frightened, disoriented, shaken. And that really struck Mr. Lasso because he's known Ms. Holthus his whole life. And he's always thought of her as a tough cookie. But in that moment, she was scared. Marshal Shane Brandon, as I mentioned earlier, is assigned to Department 18. He's been assigned to that department for approximately 2 years. As the court marshal, he is responsible for maintaining order and safety in the courtroom during calendars. Because of a previous incident that he had where an out-of-custody defendant tried to flee from the courtroom, it became his practice to stand exactly there. The doors behind him that you see in this photograph are the public entrance and exit doors. So he stands there to prevent defendants from fleeing the courtroom if they don't like the outcome. Like Mr. Lasso and Mr. Scarborough, he realized that Judge Holthus was not going to give Mr. Redden probation. So he made his way directly behind Mr. Redden, at which point he intended to handcuff him to remand him into custody. He unclasped his handcuffs, and immediately Mr. Redden bolted across the defense counsel table. When you watch the video, you'll see that Mr. Redden hops the table, but Court Marshal Shane Brandon walked around this device that was kind of blocking his path to Judge Holthus. It's called a gumbo. And in his pursuit of Mr. Redden, just as he was about to grab his legs, as he was lunging over the bench, he tripped or somehow fell. And when he fell, he sustained a huge gash to his forehead that required 25 stitches. In addition to that gash, he severely injured his shoulder. He didn't initially notice that his shoulder was injured until he stood up in front of Judge Holthus's bench and tried to propel himself over the bench using his arm. At that point, he realized there was something severely wrong with his arm. He had to have shoulder surgery and was placed on light duty until just a few weeks ago, when he returned to full duty. He doesn't remember a whole lot of the incident, not surprising, but when he stood up and realized what was transpiring, even after he couldn't get over the bench because of his injured arm, he walked around the desk where court staff sits to assist as best he could, given the circumstances. He passed his handcuffs off to Officer Cabrera and helped try to restrain Mr. Redden. Eventually, court staff in Department 18 alerted the marshal next door to the emergent situation that was occurring in Department 18. He is the court marshal assigned to courtroom 3E, which is directly to the left of Department 3F, which is where Judge Holthus's courtroom is. Court staff walked into the courtroom. They were in session, just like Judge Holthus, and said, "We need you now. It's an emergency. Please come now." So he walked out one of the rear exits to the courtroom like that, and then walked into the rear exit of the courtroom where these events were unfolding. When he walked in, his entrance into the judge's bench area was blocked because her chair, the law clerk's chair, had all kind of piled up right there. He moved them, and when he got to Mr. Redden had one handcuff in the cuffs and one still loose. He was still resisting very hard, and they were struggling to get the cuffs on him. So he took control of the loose arm so that the other individuals could get him in handcuffs. Once the defendant, Mr. Redden, finally calmed down to the point where they felt comfortable relocating him, he was taken to the holding cell just to the side of where the court staff sits. And once he was in the holding cell, Marshal Bachhuber and the other marshals.
Why does she sound so out of breath? I mean, she sounds like she's run a marathon. I just thought it was important that we did listen into the opening. So I hope those of you that are here are enjoying that, because I felt that was important. I didn't want to listen to the judge's orders or explanation. I just wasn't into that.
That were down there at this point did what they needed to do to document what had occurred in the courtroom. I think it's the blue jeans, Your Honor. I think it's somebody on blue jeans. I think it's someone on blue jeans. Oh, with somebody on movies, can you use them? Oh, God, what? What?
Somebody put some inappropriate, video on there. It was inappropriate.
Okay, we may not be doing Blue Jeans or Zoom during the hearing, if that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, Council.
It's okay.
And I'm sorry, this has never happened. At least not while I've been on the bench.
It was the first time for everything. Anyways, going back to where I was, Mr. Redden sat in the holding cell outside of the courtroom for approximately an hour or so before Marshal Bachhuber, Marshal Rollinson, and their lieutenant escorted him to the Clark County Detention Center. You'll hear that it's the court marshal's responsibility to book an out-of-custody inmate who was remanded into custody, which is why they had to do it. So they walk him over to the Clark County Detention Center where he began the booking process. You will hear from Correctional Officer Darren Needham and Correctional Officer Almas Cabrera that during the booking process, an inmate sees both psych and classification. And that's done for the purposes of determining where to house these individuals. When Mr. Redden was seen by psych on January 3rd of 2024, he reported homicidal ideations. Specifically, the report indicates, in regards to homicidal ideation, patient stated, "Only the judge. She sentenced me to prison." He denied having a plan to harm her. He also denied thoughts or intent to harm officers or other patients, or anyone other than the judge who sent him to prison. Ultimately, because of his expression of homicidal ideations, they determined it would be best to house him in Unit 2C. You will hear that Unit 2C is the unit where they send people with homicidal ideations, among other things. But with regard to his classification in 2C, it was because of his statements. So Officer Darren Needham and Almas Cabrera went to transfer release, where the defendant had been waiting for classification. They were tasked with the responsibility of getting him dressed out into his Clark County Detention Center uniform, as well as performing what they refer to as a strip search. You'll see the video of them in the area, but there's no audio. Officer Darren Needham is the taller individual standing at the front. Officer Cabrera is the individual off to his right. And when they walked into the cell, it was a single person cell. He was by himself. They observed him casually laying on the bench with his hands behind his head. They gave him commands, told him what they were there for, and he spontaneously stated to them, "Sorry I'm moving so slow. I'm kind of sore today. I tried to kill a judge." Those statements that Mr. Redden made and that violent attack against 62-year-old Judge Mary Kay Holthus are the reason that we're all here today. And when the state is done presenting its evidence, we are going to ask that you return a verdict of guilty as to the only charge in this case. Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Arnold.
Thank you.
Okay. I, for one, after watching it when it happened, am curious why he didn't just plea. So let's see if we find out why.
Do you want me to keep that on Zoom or no?
Not right now. I want to make sure his presentation is unobstructed. Okay.
May it please the court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, thank you for your time and attention. 3.7 seconds. 3.7 seconds. That was when the officer unclaps the handcuffs. My client heard it, turned and looked at him, and made a move for the bench. This all occurred in 3.7 seconds. .7 seconds, that was not enough time for Mr. Redden to formulate the intent to kill Judge Holtis. Remember what this case is about. There's one count of attempted murder. And for there to be an attempted murder, there has to be intent to kill. As everything else in life, the story didn't begin on January 13th. This story actually occurred on April 13th, 2023. This is when Mr. Redden was first arrested for what brought him in front of Judge Holtis. And basically, Mr. Redden was arrested for swinging a metal baseball bat at his brother-in-law. What was he charged with? He was charged with assault with a deadly weapon. He was also apprehended by the police, and he was taken into custody. When you're taken into custody, you're supposed to, within 48 hours, stand before a magistrate so they could decide the question of bail or not. Mr. Redden, on April 13th, told the officers that had him in custody that he refused to be transported. So he was just going to stay in custody without.
Okay. So is this attorney trying to say that Mr. Redden, the defendant, was not acting in the right mind? Because I think that once he got there and he kept slamming on that judge, he made some decisions. Now, since he's been in trouble probably for as long as, all we know is his adult record. Can you imagine his juvie record? I'm going to say that we all know that he probably knows how to play some games. Lots of them do. Lots of them do. Because if you're a criminal, if you're a crook, then y'all all seem to know what to do. And I'm not understanding, where we're going here, because I think many, many, many of them do. They know. So yeah, he's not going to go to court. He knows they're not going to like shackle him to this big old, humongous ball and drag him in there. But belligerent, non-compliant, that's what I think he was. Smart ass, that's what I think he was. So that's just my attitude from what I saw going on in the courtroom. So this guy, if he stands up here and he tries to sound like he was just this poor little Boy Scout that wasn't given his medication when he needed it, and so he went off and became this monster, I'm not buying it.
These charges being read to him. The following week, they waited some time, continued the matter. On April 20th, 2023, Mr. Redden, he failed to leave his jail cell again, and he says that he wasn't coming to the hearing. They had to continue the hearing. Again, on April 25th, Mr. Redden refused to be transported to the heading. Finally, the Justice Court Judge Jacinto, he did an order that says, by any means necessary, he needs to be present in this courtroom. So on April 26th, the officers got Mr. Redden, and he was present. The judge then, he's handed the charges. The judge asked him if he understood the charges. Mr. Redden didn't even respond to the judge's questions, even though he had a copy of the information, which was assault with a deadly weapon, on his person. And not only did he not answer the judge's questions, he became disruptive in the court proceedings. At this point, again, we have almost a week plus that we see this individual not coming to court. Once he gets to court, he's being disruptive and he's not participating in the court proceedings. At this point, his attorney, which was a public defender, then petitions the court to send him to what's called competency court.
Okay. His public defender, was he pointing out that the only reason that they asked him to go to competency court was because he was a public defender? In other words, like, is he giving him a little bit of slight right there? See, I think that this young man's been around the block enough to know how to pretend to be crazy. Nowadays, everybody knows how to get around on everything because it's always all about them. And if it isn't, if it doesn't go that way, then some people get angry, some people get even, some people get just violent. Some people just stand there watching it all happen. You, young man, knew what you were doing.
Competency court is a whole nother courtroom here in our building. And competency court is for people that do not understand the legal proceedings, are unable to assist their attorneys in their defense, or number three, appear to have some kind of mental condition that prohibits them from acting properly in court. All those things were exhibited by my client, Mr. Redden. He was sent there to be evaluated and see if he can be restored to competency. Restored to competency is basically, we can't try you. We cannot prosecute you under the law since you're not understanding what's going on. You're not displaying courtroom behavior, you're not helping your attorney out. We can't sit here and prosecute you. Go ahead. So basically, he's found on May 23rd, he's sent to Lake Crossing. Lake Crossing is a mental institution here in town, and what they do at Lake Crossing is make sure that you're evaluated to test your competency. Sometimes, people are sent there and they have lingering symptoms like they're just making up, acting crazy. Other times, they sit there and evaluate someone and their mental instability is so severe, they just have to stay at Lakes Crossing for an indefinite amount of time because, again, the state can't prosecute you under that incompetency. So in regards to Mr. Redden, he was evaluated and it was determined by Dr. John Padlini, who will be here and he'll testify in regards to this case and in regards to his finding of incompetency. And there are other psychiatrists because there at least has to be two that make that determination. And what they determined was he was incompetent to stand trial. And so he was given a course of medication because his evaluation indicated that during this course of medication, that would calm him down, bring him back to earth, bring him to a person that we can work with, that he can go to court, he can understand the proceedings, and not be disruptive in court. So Mr. Redden, when you go back to that one, I just want to make the last point that he was at Lakes Crossing for 5 months. He was eventually found by the doctors on October 20th, 2023, to be competent to go ahead and proceed with trial. So exactly 5 months later. Go ahead now, sir. After he returned back to Justice Court, he was in front of Judge Jacinto. He had discussions with his attorney at that time, and they decided that he was going to go ahead and enter into a guilty plea with the state of Nevada. Again, now he's of the right mind. He is able to discuss his case with his attorney. As you can see, there was no courtroom outbursts or anything like that. And so much so, the judge released him on November 1st, 2023. He was released from custody, okay? He returns to back to court, and now this is district court. This is in front of Judge Holtis, and on December 6th, he has no extreme courtroom behavior and goes ahead and the guilty plea agreement's read to him. He answers a myriad of questions and he pleads guilty to an attempt assault with a deadly weapon. The sentencing was scheduled for January 3rd, 2024. Next slide. What you're going to see through medical records, through the testimony of Dr. Paganini, Mr. Redden did not receive his medication that he had while he was here in Clark County Detention Center. What happened was he gets released and he's given a prescription. That prescription is supposed to be filled at the Mojave Health Center. He calls and you'll hear testimony from Karen Springer. Karen Springer is his foster mother that he stayed with during this time. They made several attempts at appointments, called and attempted to get him in so he could take his medication. However, you'll see through the testimony, he does not get medication and he doesn't get it for 2 months. So from November 1st, 2023 to January 3rd, 2024, a period of 60 days, he does not have his medication that put him in that state where we saw the appropriate behavior, what you're seeing today. Basically, he's under that medication that he had when he was in CCDC. And that's why he's displaying, good decorum, appropriate courtroom behavior. He's not going to wild out, and trust me, I'll tackle him if he tries to, do anything like that. But bottom line, that's not going to happen because he's medicated, he's calm, he understands what the proceedings are and what's going on right now. During this 60 days, Mr. Redden slipped back into his unstable mental state. The same mental state that he had when he was first arrested for assault with a deadly weapon and charged and eventually pled to attempted assault with a deadly weapon. Next. Then we have this unfortunate incident that happened on January 3rd, 2024. One thing I noticed, I looked at this videotape several times from the very beginning to the very end, that all the parties involved. A simple question wasn't asked. And I'll explain later as to why it wasn't asked. But no one asked Mr. Redden, did you take your medication today? His attorney didn't ask, the prosecution didn't ask.
Why should anybody ask, have you taken your medication? Since when does it fall on someone in the judicial system to make sure that their client is taking their medication? And you can't even advise your client because he wasn't your client then. So being belligerent can be played off exactly what you're saying. But let's say he did need medication. Well, a supervisor has a supervisor, has a supervisor, has a supervisor. Always. Am I right? I think I'm right.
Asked, nor Judge Holtis asked. I'm not saying this is anybody's fault. It simply wasn't done. So he comes into court and nobody knows what his real mental state is during that time. Nobody knows that for 60 days, he's been having paranoid thoughts. Nobody knows that he's been staying at home, not going out into the public, and different other things that were discovered by Dr. Paganini that he'll discuss. Mr. Redden did not intend to kill Judge Holtis. The evidence will show that Judge Holtis, she hurt her head when she struck the wall that was directly behind her, similar to this wall. She also was hurt when she fell on the floor. You'll see pictures. She wasn't significantly bruised. She was bruised, but it wasn't significant bruises. And those were basically on the areas where she fell.
Could you imagine if this man had a wife or a daughter that got injured in this manner and he was standing there while somebody says, well, she's not significantly injured, right? I don't think that's a very good look. Is this light too bright? Let me see. Oh, I know what's too bright. I know what it is. My iPad. I play my balloon match while I listen to trials. All right, here we go, guys.
Well, she had no cut. She had no strangulation marks on her throat. There will be no evidence that anybody ever that saw Mr. Redden touch her throat. We'll have specific evidence of where his hands were placed right before he was pulled off of Judge Holdis. But again, his actions do not indicate that he was intending to kill Judge Holdis. And again, you always have to go back to intent. That is going to be the big question that you guys are going to have to deal with at closing. Did he have the intent to go ahead and kill? And we are going to submit that the evidence does not show there is any intent to kill Judge Holdis. Thank you.
Okay. Council approach.
Okay, everybody, I'm so sorry. I had to take a quick break there. What I'm going to do is you're not going to see my beautiful face. I'm going to put up my little Highland cow, and I may interrupt them every now and again, and it will be my cow speaking for a few. I will return. I'm still here. You just won't see me for a bit. Let's go. I guess I should try to fast forward, but I'm not sure if I can. Let me see.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the attorneys were, let's say, a lot more efficient than we anticipated. So we're going to go ahead and finish for the day. I need you back here at 1 o'clock. And remember, you're all like Brock.
Alrighty then. So they're done for the day. So that was it. Oh my gosh. I figured there would have been, you know. So that was the opening statement, or whatever you want to call them. I don't know, guys. I think that part of my issue is my age. I mean, I have a very difficult time with every horrible thing that's done can just be played off to I have mental illness. It's okay that they weren't taking their medication. It's all right. I mean, she didn't die, did she? That's the attitude. That's the attitude. She's going to suffer for the rest of her life at this point. Nothing is going to stop that. And they said she's a very strong, strong woman. She may very well remain a strong, strong woman. But there's part of her always on guard that never lets, she just can't relax. Always on the watch. always fearful. But it's okay because he wasn't medicated. All right, so we're going to end day one right there, folks. And I will be back. Y'all have a good night. Stay nice. Be a nice human. It's free. And it's easy. Oh, wow. It's kind of like saying I'm free and I'm easy. I'm a nice human. It's easy. Yeah, it's a joke, y'all. Not being a nice human, that's serious. I was just making a joke out of the other stuff. To be a nice human, that's what we should all want to do every day when you get up, right? But if not, then you might be at the wrong channel. I'll see you guys later. Bye.